Ash Hollow baked under the weight of a sun that never forgave. Red canyon walls loomed like ancient sentinels, their jagged edges casting long shadows across the dry, cracked earth. The wind whispered through brittle sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of dust, old blood, and memories better left buried. In this corner of the frontier, time did not heal, it simply hardened. Evelyn Boone lay curled in the dirt beside a splintered barn, her breath shallow, her eyes barely open beneath the wide brim of her hat. Her skirts were tattered and stained, boots scuffed near to falling apart. She'd walked 30 miles with nothing but a rusted locket and a revolver she hadn't loaded in years. Her lips were cracked, her hands trembling from hunger and something deeper, grief that had no name anymore. She had once been a Boone of Willow Ridge, daughter to a man who owned 1,000 head of cattle and a river that shimmered like silver. She'd married young, a man with rough hands and kind eyes, and learned how to shoot before she learned how to bake. But the land war had taken everything. Her father's ranch burned to ash, her husband shot in the back while pleading for truce, and her brothers scattered to the wind like ashes from the family hearth. Now, all that remained was her and the locket she clutched to her chest, inside which was a miniature of a man long dead, and a single lock of hair from a baby that hadn't lived past its first frost. A pair of boots crunched against the gravel, slow and deliberate. Evelyn didn't move. She'd heard steps like that before, too sure, too heavy with purpose. But this time, they stopped beside her instead of over her. A shadow fell across her face, and a voice, low and scraped like worn leather, broke the silence. "You plan to die there, or just rest in a while?" She turned her head slowly. An old man stood over her, broad-shouldered though slightly hunched, with a long gray coat and a battered hat pulled low. His beard was trimmed short, but his eyes held the weight of decades, ice blue and sharp as broken glass. A deep scar split his jawline and disappeared beneath his collar. His right leg dragged slightly when he moved, the limp faint but permanent. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, then shifted, wincing at the pain that flared through her ribs. "You Silas Creed?" she asked, her voice dry and rough. "I am." She didn't speak again. Neither did he. After a few seconds, he reached into his coat and pulled out a cloth-wrapped square. He dropped it beside her, a piece of cornbread, still warm, and then stepped back. A wool blanket followed. She stared at both for several heartbeats, then reached with trembling fingers and took a bite, chewing slow and careful. He watched in silence. "I ain't running no more," she said finally. "Didn't ask you to." He turned and limped away, his silhouette swallowed by the barn shadow. Evelyn finished the bread, tucked the blanket beneath her chin, and closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she didn't dream of fire. The next morning, she rose before the sun. Her bones ached and her pride hurt worse, but her hands were steady. Silas was already tending his one remaining horse, a paint mare with a scar along her neck. He said nothing when Evelyn took the rusted bucket and walked it to the pump. They moved like ghosts around each other, never quite speaking, but never strangers either. He offered no questions. She gave no answers. Yet each evening, another piece of cornbread appeared, sometimes beans, once salted pork, always wrapped, always warm. Evelyn cleaned herself in the creek when she could, using river stones to scrub away weeks of grime. She tied her hair back and mended her skirt with twine and the bones of old thread. She fixed a loose hinge on the chicken coop, chased off a coyote with a dry warning shot, and restrung a broken fence wire with hands that remembered better times. Silas never thanked her, but he began leaving a second tin cup by the porch. On the 6th night, she sat near the steps, her bedroll unrolled a little closer than usual. Silas sat beside her with a quiet grunt, resting his rifle across his lap. They watched the moon rise over the canyon ridge. The silence stretched long, comfortable in its stillness. "Why here?" she asked. He scratched his beard. "Because no one else will come. That why you keep it?" He nodded once. "Land's worthless. Cattle gone. Wells near dry. But I ain't selling that. They say you buried gold out here." Silas chuckled, a sound like gravel in a pan. "Let him keep saying it. Keeps the wrong kind away." Her eyes narrowed. "The wrong kind's coming anyway." His smile faded. "I figured." She glanced toward the road, Empty now, but soon. Red Hand's moving west. Briggs is with M. His knuckles tightened around the rifle. Thought he'd hang by now. Marshall's badge kept him breathing. Silas didn't ask how she knew. Didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes, the way they darkened like gathering storm clouds. He looked away. You planning to stay? I'm planning to be here when they come. He gave her a slow, measured look. You alone? She hesitated, then opened her hand to show the locket. Not entirely. Silas stared at the miniature within, his brow furrowed, and for the first time, something changed in his expression, a softness that came and went like a ghost between shadows. My daughter had one just like that, he said. What happened to her? He didn't answer, just rose and limped back toward the barn, his figure swallowed by the dark. The days that followed moved slow but sure. Evelyn built a routine, mending what could be mended, dragging broken boards into piles, reknotting rope, feeding the lone horse when Silas forgot. Her hands grew rough again, her back stronger, and each night she slept a little closer to the porch until the step became her pillow. Then, one afternoon, she saw the dust trail on the southern road, low and wide, kicked up by hooves and wheels. 5 men, maybe 6. The glint of iron, a flag sewn onto a saddle, red handprint on black leather. Evelyn stood still as stone, eyes following the trail until it disappeared into the distance. They weren't here yet, but they were near. That night, she took her revolver apart beside the fire and began cleaning each piece. Silas sat across from her, whittling quietly. When she looked up, she caught him watching her, not with suspicion, but familiarity. You shoot, he asked. She answered by clicking the cylinder back into place with a practiced hand. He grunted. Good. They didn't need more words. The wind rose that night, colder than before. Evelyn wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and listened to it whistle through the eaves. It sounded like voices, like names she hadn't spoken in years, like home. She turned her head toward the barn where Silas slept and whispered into the darkness. Let him come. And the wind whispered back, they will. They rode into Ash Hollow like dust-born demons, 6 riders across, their silhouettes burning against the late afternoon sun. The air turned thick as their horses thundered through the canyon pass, sending up clouds that wrapped the town in a haze of dread. Guns gleamed beneath tattered dusters, and every face bore the sharp, careless grin of men who'd long forgotten mercy. Evelyn stood in the hayfield just beyond Silas's barn, a pitchfork limp in her hand. Her breath caught in her chest when she saw him, Dane Briggs, still alive, still smug, and unmistakable with that half-healed scar running from the corner of his jaw to the base of his ear. The same scar he'd earned on the night her world burned. He hadn't changed much. Same slouched shoulders, same swagger in the saddle. His eyes swept the town lazily, never once landing on her. He didn't recognize the woman she'd become. She hoped he wouldn't, at least, not yet. Behind her, Silas leaned against a fence post, chewing on a blade of grass like he was waiting for a storm to pass. He'd been watching her more often lately, especially when she thought herself alone. She knew he'd seen her behind the barn, loading, unloading, cleaning her revolver with the care of a surgeon and the familiarity of a veteran. He never asked why. He didn't need to. That night, long after the Red Hand vanished down Main Street, Evelyn found Silas in the barn, pulling something from the shadows beneath an old workbench. It was a saddle, worn but well-kept, the leather too fine for any drifter. She saw the brass plate before he could tuck it away. U.S. Cavalry, 12th Regiment, Missouri. He didn't explain, just brushed dust off the horn and turned away. Later, she heard him through the thin walls of the bunkhouse, talking in his sleep again. Names spilled from his mouth like sins he couldn't forget: Eli, West, and Clara. Then came the cries, sharp and sudden. Flank left. Hold the line. The same every night. War never leaves easy. By morning, Evelyn had had enough of silence. She found him at the edge of the pasture, hammering a loose board back into place. How many men did you kill? She asked plainly. Silas didn't look up. Enough. You know how to fight. Why haven't you? He stopped hammering, looked out over the dry land with eyes that had seen too much. Because killing turns you into a different kind of dead. Evelyn stepped closer. I've been that kind of dead a long time. He turned to face her then. His gaze was steady, but not cruel. I know. She drew in a breath, then exhaled slowly. I was more than a farmer's wife, Silas. My father trained us all when the war over the river broke out. I could hit a jackrabbit at 50 yards before I could read. I was a scout, then a sniper when things got bad. My husband, he didn't want me near the lines. Thought he could shield me. Her voice cracked. She swallowed and went on. There was a skirmish one night. Smoke everywhere. I saw a shadow coming through the brush. I fired. It was him. Silas didn't speak. I buried my gun in a wagon axle by the creek. Swore I'd never touch it again. What changed? Evelyn looked toward town, where smoke curled from chimneys, and fear kept shutters drawn tight. They're here. The Red Hand. And Briggs is wearing a star he never earned. Silas considered her, for a long time. Then, quietly, you don't sleep in the dirt beside my barn no more. You fight beside me now. The following afternoon, she returned to the creek, digging with her bare hands beneath the thistles and roots until her fingers found iron. She unearthed the wagon axle, pried it open, and pulled free a long oilcloth-wrapped rifle, her father's Winchester. It still gleamed beneath the grime, a deadly thing with a carved wooden stock and initials burned into the grip. E.B. At the ranch, Silas was already working. He laid bear traps at choke points, repaired the gate hinges with new nails, and unrolled coils of barbed wire like he was reading from an old playbook. In the shed, he uncovered crates of ammunition and gun oil tucked beneath sacks of salt. Evelyn wasn't sure if he'd been preparing for this moment all along, or if the war in him had simply never ended. As dusk crept over the valley, they sat on opposite ends of the porch, cleaning weapons and speaking only when necessary. The barn glowed with lantern light behind them, and the wind carried faint sounds from the saloon in town, laughter, boots, the clang of a piano. Men like Briggs were drinking free tonight, tossing coins stolen from the backs of freight wagons and corpses. Tomorrow would be different. When the fire was low and silence settled in for good, Silas rose and walked into the house. He returned a moment later and held something out to her in his weathered palm, a silver coin, tarnished at the edges, with a 5-pointed star engraved deep into its face. She gave this to me, he said, back in Virginia, before I left for the second time. Said I'd need it more than she would. Evelyn took the coin gently, her fingers brushing his. What was her name? She asked. Clara, he whispered. She yours? No, but I should have made her so. Evelyn turned the coin over. It felt heavier than silver should. Don't let this one be the same, he said. I won't. He nodded once and limped back inside. Alone on the porch, Evelyn leaned her rifle against her shoulder and looked out into the darkness. Somewhere beyond those ridges, Death rode in a saddle and wore a smile shaped like Dane Briggs. She could feel the weight of the old life pressing against her bones, threatening to pull her under again. But beside that weight was something new, something warm and sharp and burning. She was done running. This land had taken everything from her. But tomorrow, she'd take something back. The first rays of dawn cracked the sky like a bullet splitting glass. The horizon glowed faint and copper-red as if the earth itself was bleeding. A silence stretched across the land, too still, too hollow. Then came the tremble. Hoofbeats. The Red Hand rode hard, their dust storm trailing like a cloak of war behind them. 6 riders crested the ridge, their silhouettes cut against the morning light, weapons gleaming in saddle holsters. They expected ruin, an old ranch barely standing, a lone cripple with more ghosts than bullets. But what they found was a canyon dressed for battle. The moment the first horse crossed the boundary fence, a tripwire snapped and a rain of shale came down from the bluff. Screams echoed. 2 horses spooked, tossing their riders into thorns and stone. From the barn rooftop, Evelyn fired once, twice, sharp cracks that split the air like lightning. A man dropped forward in his saddle, blood blossoming down his back. Panic surged in the gang. They scattered for cover, but found none. The ground betrayed them. Traps hidden beneath, hay snapped shut, with a bone-breaking crunch. Smoke bombs lit up from the fence posts, clouding their vision with thick, choking fog. Amid the chaos, Evelyn moved like she was born for it, quiet, invisible, merciless. Every shot she took found a mark. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. This was the girl from the militia, the widow made of steel and sorrow. Silas emerged from the shadows near the corral, rifle across his back, pistol in hand. He didn't shoot, not yet. His eyes scanned the battlefield with the precision of a tactician, and when he saw the figure riding through the smoke, calm, arrogant, untouched, he stepped forward. Dane Briggs sat atop a black horse, his coat flapping behind him like a preacher's robes. He swung down slow, swaggering through the wreckage like it was a town social and not a bloodbath. He saw Silas and grinned. Well now, look what crawled out of the grave. Silas raised his pistol. Drop the iron, Briggs. Dane chuckled. You gonna shoot me, old man? Behind Silas, Evelyn climbed down from the barn. Her boots landed soft on the ground, but she kept her rifle raised. Briggs saw her and tilted his head. Now hold on, he said, stepping sideways. That you, little Evelyn Boone? Didn't recognize you behind all that grit. She said nothing. Her rifle never wavered. Briggs looked back to Silas. This your army? A limping ghost and a broken woman. Silas's voice was ice. Better soldiers than you ever rode with. Briggs took a step forward. Heard a lot about you, Creed. Captain Silas Creed. Cavalry legend. War hero. Man who vanished after disobeying orders. Silas's jaw tensed. You were supposed to burn that village in Red Fork, weren't you? Briggs sneered. But you refused. Got half your unit slaughtered instead. Silas lifted the pistol. That's enough. Briggs smirked. You should have stayed buried, old man. Then he moved fast, drawing with the speed of a snake, but he never made it. Evelyn's shot rang out first. It hit just beneath the scar, tearing through muscle and bone. Dane Briggs dropped like a marionette with its strings cut, dead before he hit the ground. His revolver spun from his hand and landed in the dust beside Silas's boot. Silence fell, thicker than before. Smoke drifted low across the battlefield, wrapping the dead in soft gray shrouds. A few of the Red Hand riders who hadn't bled out took off into the canyon, too scared to look back. Evelyn ran to Silas, heart pounding in her throat. He was standing, but blood streamed from a tear in his shoulder, soaking through his coat. I'm fine, he muttered, but his knees buckled, and she caught him before he fell. They collapsed beside the porch, dirt and blood smeared across both of them. Evelyn tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it to the wound, hands shaking. You stubborn fool, she whispered. Silas smiled weakly. Takes one to know one. The townspeople came in slowly, drawn by the thunder of gunfire and the smoke curling up like a signal. When they reached the ranch, they stopped in stunned silence. A woman with a rifle and a wounded old man had done what lawmen wouldn't. The sheriff stood slack-jawed among them. Evelyn stared him down with eyes hard as flint. Where were you? She asked. He couldn't answer. Silas leaned against her, breathing shallow but steady. You brought justice, he said, voice gravel rough. Not just for them, but for yourself. She didn't reply. She just squeezed his hand. The days that followed were quiet. The townsfolk buried the dead. The ranch's broken fences were mended by neighbors who'd never set foot there before. Someone brought fresh bread. Another dropped off nails and lumber. Silas healed slowly. The bullet hadn't gone deep, but age made the recovery longer. He refused to stay in bed, instead directing repairs from a rocking chair on the porch. Evelyn didn't leave. She took over the ranch, not with deeds or signatures, but with calloused hands and quiet authority. She fed the horses, tended the fields, fixed the hinges that still creaked. At night, she sat beside Silas under the stars, her rifle resting nearby, her eyes softer than before. One evening, with the sun bleeding out over the horizon and the cicadas beginning their hymn, she opened her palm and stared at the silver coin. Its star gleamed faintly in the fading light. She turned to Silas. You ever think she forgave you? He didn't answer. He just reached over and closed her fingers around the coin. She'd have liked you, he said. The wind picked up, rustling the tall grass. It didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like life. That night, Evelyn lay down in the bed she'd built herself in the room overlooking the east field. The boards still creaked. The window didn't latch right, but it was hers. She stared at the ceiling and smiled. She had once slept in dirt beside his barn, nameless and alone. Now, when she lay down each night, it was in a bed built with her own hands. And before she closed her eyes, she always whispered, "I'm home."